Hi, my name is Jared Stone, and I am a senior technical curriculum developer here at Jitterbit. Today, we're going to dive into a tutorial that is part of our Jitterbit Basics series that shows you how to quickly connect your data systems using the Jitterbit Harmony platform. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to use the Jitterbit Harmony Cloud Studio to show you how to quickly configure the ServiceNow connector and create a very basic operation using that connection. So I'll be starting here in Cloud Studio, which is accessible through the Harmony portal at login.jitterbit.com. So once navigated to this area, I'm going to create a new project. So let's click the New Project button on the right-hand side. So now we need to provide a project name. It's always a best practice when naming these projects to use something that is very informative and descriptive. So in this case, I'll say something like ServiceNow to FTP tutorial. And from that, I want to select my environment. And then at the very bottom, you have the option to add a description. Okay. Once you do all of those things, you can click the Start Designing button at the very bottom. Okay, so now I've entered the Cloud Studio Designer portion. So let's start off by defining the ServiceNow endpoint. Okay, so over here on the right-hand side, I'll just start to type in ServiceNow, and you can see that this filters down for me, and then I'm able to select that particular endpoint. So we need to configure this endpoint to start with. So you can see here, there's a few things that I need to take care of, such as the endpoint name, client ID, client secret. All of these areas that are notated with the red asterisk means that it is a required area. Also on the right hand side, you can see the V that is within the box or the square there. What that means is that you can leverage things like project variables, uh, to enter things like the client ID or the username, so on and so forth. So let me go ahead and take a moment and populate this information. Okay, so now I've populated all this information and I will test the connection. You can see here on screen that I have a successful connection notated right there. So let's go ahead and save the changes. And now we're taken back to that main page or designing portion of Cloud Studio. So next what we'll do is define the activity of that endpoint. You can see here we have a few options: query, create, update, and delete. So I'm going to select query. Just drag and drop that over to the canvas. And you can see as I drag and drop that over, now I have the opportunity to start building this operation. So the first thing I'll do is just change the name out of a best practice, and I'll just say something like ServiceNow to FTP. Okay, gives a little context, a little bit of an idea as to what this operation is doing. You could also, if you wanted to, come down here and change the name, but we'll drill into the actual activity here to do that. All right. So first off is the name, which is set by default to query. All right. Now, from time to time, if the list just below here is blank, you can always refresh over here on the right hand side to bring in um, the latest and greatest as far as objects go. So what I'm going to do is select my items object. Then I'll come down to the bottom, click next. Okay, so once we select the object, we can now select the fields that we want here. Okay, so I'm just going to select a few fields. I can filter these if I would like. So I could go for something like the price, and then I might look for something like the name, description, and maybe the ID. Okay, so you can obviously add conditions in this area as well. You can test the query, which will give you a bit of an idea as to, maybe the conditions that you're adding, along with, you could even use this to see what data might be back behind some of those fields if you're unfamiliar with them. But nevertheless, let's just go ahead and click next at the bottom, and then you can see the response. We'll go ahead and click finished, and now we are good for that particular configuration. Okay, so now let's go ahead and define our target endpoint, okay, which is going to be our FTP. So once again, we're coming over here to the right hand side, and we can just start to type FTP and then select that. Okay, so I'm just going to click on that, and then you can see that the endpoint configuration screen comes up. Once again, you have the option to rename this if you would like, something descriptive, something informative to you. Okay, I'll go ahead and put in my host information, and then my username and password. And then we'll test the connection. And I have a successful connection. So we'll go ahead and save the changes. And now we need to define the activity for this particular endpoint. Okay, so we're going to be writing the data to the FTP. So let's select right here, and we'll just drag and drop that over to our operation. And once again, we could rename that particular activity right here. We could also drill into that endpoint or that activity to do that as well. Okay, so you have the name here, whether or not you're providing the schema, the path in which you want to place this, and then the file names area. So I might say something like result underscore square bracket. Um, let's use date and then time. And then we'll put the file extension there. And then we'll click next. And then click finished. So now we'll take the mouse and we'll put it over the operation just in between the source and the target, and you can see that a plus icon appears. So we can click this to add a new transformation, which is going to allow us to map and manipulate our data from source to target. Okay, so select new transformation, and here you can go ahead and rename this, maybe something like ServiceNow FTP. And on the left-hand side is your source. On the right-hand side is your target. So now we need to define the target schema, okay? A few different options here. We can select the define option, which we can create flat, hierarchical, or using a sample file. Another option just below here is mirroring the source schema, okay? Which is basically just going to duplicate what we see on the left-hand side and create that as the target structure on the right. So what I'm going to do is use sample file. Here you have the option to use saved schemas. You can also provide new schemas as well. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll provide a new schema, and I might say something like JSON schema. Okay, so we'll place the schema in the text box below, and you can see just below the text box, and it is an area or is a notification that shows us that the schema is valid. So we'll go ahead and save the changes, and then we will click finish. Now you can see that that schema or that structure has now been created on our target side. So we'll just take the entity node and we'll map that over to item, then auto map, and then we'll return to the workflow. And that's really it. We've defined out each of these particular areas. So what we want to do is go ahead and deploy and run this. You can see that the operation is now running right here in this indicator. And in just a moment, it will provide us as to whether or not this was successful or not. And there we have a successful deployment and execution of this operation. You can also click success to pull up the operation log for that particular event that is ran. Okay, so now let's jump over to the FTP, and I'll refresh really quickly here. And you can see the results. So let's go ahead and open those results. And there they are. So that right there completes our tutorial on how to configure the ServiceNow connector. So for deeper training opportunities, please check out our learning platform, Jitterbit University. You can access this at university.jitterbit.com. Now, you will need an enrollment key to access the training content, and you can get that information from your customer success or alliance manager.